just before this inflationary surge began, there was a comprehensive review of the monetary policy framework. And as part of that, the Fed reaffirmed the 2% inflation target. It would be very surprising, and it would not be good for the Fed's future credibility for them in the first inflationary surge after reasserting that monetary policy framework and that inflation target to say, well, 3% is close enough for government work, and so we're done. That would mean that the next time there was an inflationary surge with a new 3% target and inflation goes up to 9% and the Fed says we're headed back down to 3, the folks would say, well, last time you said you're headed back down to 2. Why should we believe you now? So it's important for the Fed, and the Fed has been quite consistent in communicating that 2% is the inflation target. I don't think that inflation has to come all the way down to 2% before the Fed starts easing. But it has to be their preferred inflationary target measure, which is core PCE, has to have come down much closer to 2% and have stayed there for a while. And the other factors in the economy that could be inflationary, particularly tightness in the labor market, have to have adjusted themselves enough for the Fed to feel comfortable cutting.
I guess one question I have is, in the markets, he took the time back in the fall to mention the market had done a lot of his work for him. You know, treasury yields were at 5%, equities were weak, credit spreads were a little bit wobbly. Now, all of a sudden, you have yields back to, 4.25% roughly. You have equity markets doing very well, credit spreads are very tight, and he chooses not to mention financial conditions. Is that a signal or just how he's thinking about it? That, I think, is confusing me and seems to be pointing to a person who really wants to be dovish.
So I think you've got, we're at an inflection point in the Fed's policy path and in Fed's communications. At the outset of this process, there were two hypotheses: that interest rates wouldn't have to go as high as they traditionally have in the past in order to contain this inflation, a variety of reasons for that, and that interest rates wouldn't have to stay as high for as long in order to contain this inflation, a variety of reasons for that. I think the first of those hypotheses has been borne out. Interest rates, the Taylor rule, for example, a guideline that central banks around the world have used to guide interest rate policy, would have suggested at the outset of this you needed short-term interest rates of 9 or 10%. We didn't get there. Inflation has significantly subsided. But the second hypothesis was wrong. It's going to take a longer period of time than many of us, myself included, believed at the outset of this for policy to do its work. Now, at the outset of the process, it was clear that interest rates had to go higher, not clear how high. Interest rates had to stay high for a while, not clear how long. And so everybody was agreed we at least have to do something. We're now at the inflection point where there will be differences of view among the committee and therefore different communications from the various members of the committee. And the job of the chair is to try to maintain a consensus and direct that committee to an outcome, which complicates his communication task as well. So it's going to be confusing, and people will, I think, take wrong signals by hearing what they want to hear as the tone of the messages from the various Fed communicators begins to